It's the early 2000s. You've caught Final Destination at the cinema, and you're now terrified of planes and taking showers. Your Nokia has been in the washing machine 6 times, and it's still kicking. And you've cozied up with your PS2, ready to dive into some of the finest horrors of that era. Silent Hill 2, 3, and 4. Resident Evil has a bunch of releases, not to mention a whole host of other titles to grace our screens. I know I'm not the only one. There's a lot of us who pine for those times where horror games, especially survival horror games, really came into their own. Older titles were getting shinier, polished sequels with complex stories and new scares we hadn't seen before. And new IPs were getting established, using video games as a vehicle to discuss incredibly delicate and intense stories. So today, I want to talk to you about Hollowbody, a brand new game that brings that era of gaming back onto our screens and into our hearts. If you're someone wishing for that old nostalgia hit, but with something completely new, I think this just might be the game for you. Hollowbody is a new PS2-styled survival horror game with inspirations from Silent Hill, Resident Evil, and Blade Runner, to name a few. I was lucky enough to receive a copy of Hollowbody before the release date, so I've had my grubby little hands on this for like 2 weeks. So a massive shout out to Headware Games, Tom Copeland, and the Horror Game Awards for making that happen, so I could take an in-depth look at one of my most anticipated games of the year. At the time of recording this video, I've completed the game 3 times, and maybe more by the time this actually comes out. So I'd like to think I've given it a really good shot and seen a lot of what it has to offer, but I definitely haven't seen everything it has to offer. Hollowbody is the creation of Headware Games, a solo indie game developer. It takes its inspiration from classic survival horror games of the early 2000s, hence my intro. In this game, you play as Mika, a black market shipper who is looking for their missing partner who disappeared about 12 days ago. Now, before I start getting into the story and some spoilery content, which will be timestamped for those who are looking for a spoiler-free experience, I want to take a minute to just appreciate what Hollowbody does so well from the get-go. As soon as you boot the game up, you're met with the most delicious combination of eerie visuals and a haunting theme tune. I am absolutely obsessed with this piece of music, like to the point I'd just be doing anything else and have it playing in my head, and quite honestly, it's a trend throughout the game as this title has some brilliant music pieces. There's certainly a lot of Silent Hill inspiration in there, but it comes together to create something altogether unique and beautiful. There's a wonderful combination of eerie background noise and haunting melodies to accommodate your exploration through worn-down hallways and dilapidated rooms. Another thing that I think a lot of people are going to appreciate me mentioning here is, yes, the game does have tank controls. They're off by default, but you can turn them on in the options. There are also a few nice settings here to customize your experience, as well as the ability to remap your controls. Also important to mention that Hollowbody has 3 difficulty modes, at least as far as I have found. You have casual, where the game is a little bit gentler with you and easier to get around combat-wise. This difficulty is brilliant for those looking for a more explorative experience. Then there is intended difficulty, which is what I would say is your regular difficulty, and it's generally recommended for people who are used to survival horror games, especially from that era of the early 2000s. I did my first playthrough on intended, so I definitely recommend going for this if you are a survival horror veteran. There is also punished difficulty. Now this difficulty is only unlockable after your first playthrough. I would like to add in that I did my first playthrough on intended, so I don't know if it unlocks if you do casual the first time, but this mode makes the combat much more challenging, with more enemies who can easily take you out in a hit or 2. Resources are also scarcer here, so you really have to manage your ammo and health. I'd also like to take this time to say, for those of you who like to know the numbers, my first playthrough was on intended difficulty, as I said before, and it took about 4 hours. I didn't find everything, but I did spend a lot of time searching around, give or take some time depending on your playstyle. My second playthrough was unpunished and was actually a bit quicker at about 3.5 hours, but I think that's mostly because I already knew the areas and what to do. But enough about all of that, let's have a little chat about the game and the gameplay. So I want to start with saying Hollowbody is a classic 2000s style survival horror in every sense. Visually, it's got these brilliant retro feeling visuals that take me right back to Silent Hill 2 and 3 especially, combining a third person camera with fixed camera angles to create incredible scenes that creep the hell out of you. The cutscenes do that wonderful little letterboxing trick to make it feel cinematic, and it really does do a good job of feeling cinematic for a game like this. From the opening scenes to puzzles and even some of the environment effects just as you're running around, it really creates this sensation that you're in a movie at times. A creepy, unsettling movie. The general thematic setting of the game is just gorgeous and done very nicely to intertwine with the gameplay. Your main story plot is finding your partner, yes, but throughout the game you'll come across a number of collectibles which provide more and more lore about the world around you. The first such instance is signals, which you will come across throughout exploring the game, and you can use your little in-game radio to dial into those signals and get a little slice of the past and what actually happened around you.
What do you think you're doing? My husband has work in the morning.
It's just a precaution, Mom. All residents are advised to stay in their homes until further notice.
Alongside signals, you've got the survival horror staple of notes and documents. These are littered around everywhere and are brilliantly written. Some will help with puzzles or progression, but many of them paint a rich picture of people long since gone in this apocalyptic city. In fact, a really strong theme that carries throughout the background lore and world building of this game points a lot to things happening in modern Britain, as well as many other places, of civil displacement and a lack of responsibility being taken by those who have been responsible for injury and death. Though I don't know exactly how much it inspired this game, it felt to me that the developer took inspiration from quite a few things that have been going on in Britain, past and present, and it's both delicately weaved into the story and brutally expressed for all to see. A winning combination, in my opinion. Oh, and of course that's another important factor to mention. Hollowbody is set in Britain. The main bulk of the game is in a city that is particularly post-apocalyptic, but there are views of the world outside of this city which are much more akin to the futuristic dystopia of Blade Runner. There's something really wonderful about these clashes as you run through the streets smothered in rubble, overgrown lawns, and this strange fungal mold growing everywhere. There are some really sweet touches like old phone boxes and train tickets that I think will tickle anyone who's been in Britain long enough to remember a time before e-tickets and mobile phones. Hollowbody, I think, is especially good with this, as it's clearly modelled after areas that simply aren't London, which is often where a lot of games take their Britain inspiration from. Here, it feels more like small towns and suburbs in the 2000s, which is kind of niche because you'd have to be a certain age and from certain places to recognise it. There's also a lot of other themes at play here, but if I start talking about them now, I might never stop, so I'll probably leave that for another video. Another important thing to talk about in Hollowbody is the in-game menus. As with many other parts of it, it's directly inspired by those classic survival horror menus we all know and love. To be honest, the main things I used were the inventory and document menus. You're automatically redirected to the documents every time you pick one up, but the inventory is essential. You'll be combining items, inspecting items, and equipping things in here. There is also a quick select menu, but I didn't use it myself. I'm a bit of a stickler for the old pause and equip method. One of the parts of the menus I didn't really use at all was the map, but there's a really good reason for this. Hollowbody does such a good job with its level design that it is very intuitive for those who are able to mentally map out areas as they go. The map is going to be super useful if this isn't a natural thing to you though, so it's there if you need it. Just a fair warning though, there is a part of the game when the map isn't accessible, which is completely story appropriate, so you might want to have a notepad handy to jot things down if mind mapping isn't really your thing. I think when we think of the classics, we also always think about puzzles, and Hollowbody doesn't disappoint in this department. There are a few puzzles scattered throughout the game, and a lot of the time I will say what's quite handy is you're often not too far from what you need to complete them. Sometimes the item or clue you will need will actually be in the room with you. That doesn't mean they're easy though. There's enough of a challenge here that you'll feel satisfied when you complete them, but I didn't find anything so difficult that I couldn't progress. And yes, there are puzzles where, unless you have an incredible memory, you will need to jot down things for reference or figuring out. So let's talk a little bit more about, the actual game and the gameplay. The person you're going to be in control of for the story is Mika, a woman who is looking for her partner, Sasha. Now I want to say I really like Mika. She's got a bit of a humour to her that is a little bit similar to Heather from Silent Hill 3, but it's not quite as intense. She really recognises how depressing and despondent it is in the remains of the city around her. A fantastic touch I really like is that in some instances when you enter a room and find a dead body, Mika will gasp or make a comment audibly before you even go and interact with them for flavour text.
Oh, Jesus.
It really gives you this impression that Mika is experiencing these things immediately in the moment. It's a really nice way to have this feedback from the character. Her personality also really fits the environment she's in. She's desperate, but she's driven, with nothing stopping her on her journey, no matter what. She's also fairly capable, knows her way around weapons, and that takes me on to something else I want to talk about, which is the enemies and the combat. So first up, let's have a quick chat about combat. As I said, Mika is fairly capable, and I'll say that combat is very clearly reminiscent of Silent Hill, but nowhere near as clunky in some respects. You get an aiming reticle when you aim, which is absolutely brilliant for knowing which enemy you're actually going to attack. There are a few different ranged weapons in the game, including special unlockable ones that you get through, well, you'll have to figure it out. And there's also quite a few different melee weapons. Some are really strong and slow, others faster, a little bit weaker. Something worth noting is when you get a new melee weapon, swing it around a bit before you run into combat. I found things like the makeshift axe would hit a lot slower than the makeshift club, which would land me getting hit a few more times than I'd like to against enemies. Oh, and speaking of enemies, these are brilliant. There's a good variation of enemies throughout the game. Most of them you'll come up against consistently in the streets and other areas, whereas some of the earlier parts of the game you only have one type to ease you in. I actually didn't have to fight too many of the tougher enemies, so I can't really speak to how many bullets or hits each one takes, but that does lead into something else I wanted to mention, which is pacifist runs. Now, I don't think, at least at the time of recording this video, that you actually get anything for a pacifist run. It didn't stop me doing one, and yes, I can confirm it is technically possible by the game standards to play the entire game without killing any of the main enemies found in the game. I actually know this because when you complete the game, you get a wonderful little stat screen which will let you know how many enemies you defeated. And you might be wondering, what's the enemies burnt bit about? Well, for those of you who are like me, and are a big fan of Resident Evil's Crimson Heads, on Punish difficulty, you have to burn enemy bodies in order to stop them reanimating. A lovely little feature I'm really glad was added in as more of an optional thing than part of the main experience. And now I want to talk about endings, so don't worry, we haven't hit the spoilers just yet, but we will in a minute. But just before we go into that, I want to say yes, the game does have multiple endings, and no, I don't know how many. I've managed to get 2, kind of have a feeling there might be more to uncover here, but I'm going to have to leave it to you to find out how many there are and how you're going to unlock them. Right, so here I'm going to put a nice spoiler warning for you all. There's 2 features, one big, one maybe not so big, but I want to talk about it anyway, that I wanted to cover. But I feel like these spoil a bit of the game, especially the first one. So if you want to avoid any major spoilers, skip ahead to the time on the screen right now. You done it? You skipped? Everybody left want to hear some spoilers? Okay, let's go. So, a huge thing that surprised me about this game, and major props to the devs and the way all the marketing's done for this game, because it didn't really reveal this to me at all, is that you get an opportunity to play the game solo as Mika, yeah, or, you know what? You can turn the majority of your playthrough into a companion mission. Remember companion missions? Remember walking into rooms in Silent Hill 2 and getting jump scared by creepy Maria just being there? Well, baby, you can get that good stuff right here in Hollowbody. During the apartment section of the game, which happens fairly on and is your first major area after being tutorialized to the game, you meet someone. It's a guy standing on a rooftop. And in fact, I think this was shown in some of the trailers, so will be of no surprise really. However, the game does something good here, and instead of just having a cutscene play out like most classic survival horrors would, you actually get options to talk to him. So I have to be honest, my first time playing, I assumed it was of no consequence, and subsequently due to my answers, this person jumped from the roof and kills themselves. I just kind of figured, hey, it's a horror. It was probably always going to go that way. But cut to my second playthrough and I choose different options. I ignore my radio and instead try to talk to the man and get them down. And you know what? I did it. You can actually talk him down and he will join you for the rest of the game. Doing this on my second playthrough was a bit nuts, because I was playing on Punished and suddenly strong masses of enemies wasn't my only worry, but I also had to manage dealing with an entirely separate person throughout my journey. I will say though, overall, I really liked it. His name is just Mysterious Stranger. I don't know if there's any way to actually find out his real name, but it changes the game in subtle ways that make a big difference, particularly when going to new areas. Places where Mika was originally just muttering to herself about the world around her, she now has someone to talk to, someone who will talk back and give an opinion on what's going on.
That smell. Something's burning. What's that smell?
Oh, kinda smells like bacon.
Now, a few other holdovers from classic survival horrors are here: secrets and backtracking. Though thankfully there isn't really a lot of the latter in a regular playthrough. There are mostly areas you're going to go through once, twice at most. That being said, in my runs, I did experience one completely optional bit of backtracking, which doesn't sound too bad, except it runs through one of my most hated parts in survival horrors: sewers. Now, the sewers in Hollowbody, I don't actually want to talk about them too much because some awesome things happen in the sewers, and it's brilliant, and you should honestly just play the game and experience it yourself and turn those headphones up while you're at it. But that doesn't stop me hating video game sewers in general, especially because they're cramped and they're moldy and they make my stomach turn something fierce. So when I tell you there is an optional backtracking piece that takes you through a hellish sewer, not once, not twice, but 3 times, you've got to wonder, is it worth it? Now that's up to you. You see, the reason for this backtrack is to unlock a special weapon in the game. So big spoilers here, or alternatively, send this timestamp to your friend who desperately wants to know how the hell you unlock apartment 14. This is going to be a bit of a long one, so strap in or feel free to stick ahead if you just don't really care. So on the second floor of the apartments, there is a hole in the ground in one of the apartments where you can see a key and a weapon, but you just can't reach. Actually reminds me of a lot of Silent Hill 3 when you have to go get the bread tongs to pull out the key. Unfortunately, there's no tongs here though. The key that you actually see down here opens apartment 14, which is the only apartment in the apartment block that can't be unlocked with the master key card. Later on in the apartments, you set the sprinklers off, and by doing so, the rest of the apartments get sealed off from you. During my first couple of playthroughs, I thought nothing of it, but my third run, I was trying my best to unlock everything, and I couldn't figure out how you get that key without locking yourself out of the area. It turns out, after some contemplation, that I figured it out, but it seems so elaborate time-wise that surely not. Surely there's no way that that's how you do it. It is how you do it. So what you do is later on in the game, you'll make a makeshift hook to get a key in a bathtub. This is in one of the houses, number 20, on the street that you go to after you find the wallet and house key. For those of you who play to this bit, you'll understand. For those who don't, just play the game. Now, the hook is used in the main story, but much like many things, it remains in your inventory. So I've got the hook, I can go get the key with that, but how do I get back into the apartments? Now this is the long bit, and depending on your difficulty, will depend on how hard it is for you to do. You have to progress through the cemetery, the church, the sewers, now that's the hard part, back onto the streets until you find a shop, which is absolutely not a spa shop. Then in the shop you will get a pack of fuses. You get 3 fuses, and from this point usually you'd walk into the next room and continue on with the story. But don't do that. You need to go back out the way you came, onto the streets, into the hellish sewer, through the church, the cemetery, the suburbs, and back to the apartments to insert that fuse into a fuse box by the door that closed on you earlier. Go back up to the 2nd floor of the apartments to use the hook to get the key, back down to the bottom floor to use the key on apartment 14, and voila! You can then enjoy the rewards therein. Obviously, the game gets a bit easier from that point on for most, but you still have to go back through the sewer a 3rd time, and personally, I'd rather not. I did love this though. It was a lot of effort, but it's highly rewarded by what you get, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel accomplished when I did it, and I think that's what brings real value to this. It's also worth mentioning, there are also fun unlocks you get just for finishing the game too, from various modes to extra weapons that have a very nice nod to some of its core inspirations. As for other secrets, I honestly don't know. I found a quiver with arrows at one point, but I've yet to find a bow, so I don't know if that's another weapon to find or if those arrows can be used for an optional puzzle or something. I'll be honest, I kind of love that I didn't find everything right away, because finding new things in this game is so fun and rewarding each subsequent playthrough. Okay, we're now out of spoiler territory, so you can get cozy knowing I'm not going to spoil anything. And I've also done my best to avoid talking too much about the story, as this is a game I think you really need to play yourself to experience. So, what's my overall impressions of Hollowbody? Well, as I said before, I've played the game 3 times, and I'm already itching for a 4. So I think it'd be safe to say that I am a big fan of Hollowbody. It does what it does so well. It takes its inspiration seriously, but it has a strong sense of self-identity while it's at it. You can see how much care was taken to give the player both a sense of nostalgia, but in a brand new world. If you aren't a fan of classic survival horrors, but have always wanted to get into them, I'd absolutely recommend this as a good entry point into that style of game, as it's more accessible than getting old consoles or emulating. And if you're a fan, you'll love this. Truly, you will. You'll be pointing out little references and grinning the whole time when you're not dealing with a consistent, sinking feeling of dread that it does such a great job at instilling in the player. In terms of the type of horror, I actually don't want to say horror here for fear of spoiling the game. But you've got a bit of psychological, plenty of body horror, and I feel like combining it all with this dystopian clash of science fiction and old rundown Britain is just mwah, chef kiss. The story is solid, especially for the length of the game. You know why you're doing what you're doing, even if you might doubt the motivation from a personal standpoint. I mean, I don't think I'd run around this hellscape like Mika does, but each to their own. And I do feel like where you end up with it is very satisfying. In fact, I felt by the end of the game, I actually did get a sense of feeling quite hollow, in a sort of melancholy way, which felt pretty intentioned considering the title. Also, something I didn't already touch on, the voice acting is brilliant. The whole game is fully voiced and there is some brilliant talent here. Our wonderful friend on the phone was one of my favourites. There is so much great delivery to the lines that made me gasp or cackle out loud.
Are you feeling all right, little sparrow? You look pale.
What do you care?
You look like you've seen a ghost.
I don't know what's real anymore. They keep coming.
Oh dear. You were doing so well. It's a shame you're not cut out for this.
Fuck you.
Such a filthy mouth for such a pretty little thing.
What are you trying to achieve here? Why do you keep calling me?
Why do you keep picking up?
On a personal level, having a game like this so delicately intertwine its main story with the background lore of the world around it is something to behold. The developer really made me feel for the people who suffered here at the hands of authorities and governments. Maybe that's because it hits close to home, but I think it would be reasonable to say that this probably will hit home for most of us, regardless of where we come from. Because the world is on fire. At least games like this help us navigate that fire. I think Hollowbody is a triumph of modern survival horror. Even with its nostalgic inspirations, it's an improvement on an existing formula and shows us that not only can great games like this still be made, but indie developers are where we should be looking for it. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you want to play Hollowbody, it is out right now, right this second on Steam. So go check out the link in the description and go find Sasha. As always, likes are appreciated, and if you like this content, I'd recommend subscribing to the channel. And don't forget,
You're safe now, little sparrow. Mother will keep you warm.